Hello and welcome to another episode of Does Anyone Remember, the show where I take a look at games from my childhood, games that I don't see people talk about very often, or just generally kind of obscure ones. And today I'm taking a look at the Unholy War, which was released on the PS1 in 1998. It's a weird strategy fighting game hybrid type thing. Admittedly, I don't really know how to describe it properly. It was developed by Toys for Bob, who had previously worked on games like Star Control, The Horde, and Pandemonium, and just like Pandemonium, it was published by Eidos and Crystal Dynamics, which did give it a nice little selling point in the form of having a demo for the upcoming Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver being included on the disc. The game starts with an opening video to introduce the general world and fighters, a spaceship crashing down onto the planet Zara and the ensuing fight for survival between the planet's native arcane races and the Technos invaders, as it introduces almost all of the playable fighters. This is mostly done for a sizzle reel of eye catches, mostly to just go, hey, look at this character, they're pretty cool, you want to play them, right? And some of these are a lot more effective than others. This brings us to the title screen, and there's two different ones, one with the Arcane Prana Devil and the other with the Technos Jaeger, but realistically this main menu is only here to just have a button to take you to the Soul Reaver demo, and while Soul Reaver is by all accounts pretty great, that's not what we're here for today. Entering the Unholy War, we immediately get a nice little bit of visual presentation for the main menu, a giant machine just coming out of the crater with the mode select. The options menu is definitely limited, but it takes you right into the heart of the machine, and I think the presentation of the menus is very nice and thematically appropriate. Up next is the Mayhem mode. This is basically your simple quick play option. You choose either one player versus the computer or two player versus, and assign the teams to have either just the Arcane Warriors, just the Technos Warriors, or you can have all the warriors on either side. Right, and then you just pick your stage to fight on. It does include a very nice cycle levels option. This keeps the stage changing between fights and can provide quite the advantage because some warriors definitely benefit more from some stages than others. After that, it's just pick your fighter and away you go. But once you pick your fighter, there's no retreat, no surrender, every fight is to the death, and as you would expect, you win by taking out all of your opponent's warriors. The other game mode is the main attraction and star of the show. This is a strategy mode where you can play as either the Technos or the Arcane Warriors across 12 levels to determine the outcome of the war and the fate of the planet. For the Technos and Arcane races, peace is no longer an option. It's kill or be killed, with uneasy alliances forming on both sides. This war doesn't end until one side is completely eradicated. But before we get to that, it's probably best if I take a moment to talk about how the game actually plays. Moving in the Unholy War's strategy mode is done across hex tiles, with each warrior having a different amount of tiles that they can move each turn. Some can move 1 or 3, but most can move 2. Each tile also has a stage associated with it, and when a battle begins, the fight will be on the stage corresponding to the tile that the defending warrior was stood on. You can move or use a map ability up to 3 times per turn, and if you're on a tile adjacent to an enemy warrior, you can attack to initiate a battle. If you have multiple warriors within the same attack range, they can also join in the fight if their ally falls. The Unholy War's combat is a standard reduce your opponent's health bar to 0 and you win type affair, with each fighter having 3 attacks on square, triangle and circle, which for the rest of this video I'm going to be referring to as their A, B and C. I would have used 1, 2 and 3, but that would lead to incorrect fighting game notation, so it's going to be A, B and C for this, with the X button being to jump. Power-ups will also sometimes spawn in around the arena. There's an Energizer, which gives you infinite energy for a short period. There's Invincibility, which makes you immune to all damage for a short amount of time. There's the Super Jump, which makes you jump higher for a little while. The Speed Boost, which makes you run faster for a little while. And finally, there's just a normal health pickup, which will recover a little bit of your health. Under your red health bar, you have a yellow energy meter, and each move has an energy cost. These vary by move, with some being very spammable and others effectively having a pretty hefty cooldown, where you have to wait for the energy to come back before you can use it again. Some of the warriors on both sides can fly, but this is a little bit weird, because while some of the flying characters can regenerate energy in the air, most of them need to land, and I think that's a little bit strange and a bit unbalanced. Rather annoyingly, the only other fighting game I can think of with this kind of control scheme with 3 attacks and an energy bar is the absolutely dreadful Simpsons Wrestling, which probably isn't a game you were expecting to hear mentioned here, but hey, it's the closest comparison I can think of. But unlike in that game where you can go for a pinfall at any time, in the Unholy War every round is to the death. The strategy mode is where you get basically all of the world building, story, and information about the various warriors on both sides. Told by a being known only as the Observer, it tells of what it has witnessed in this seemingly endless unholy war that has ravaged the planet for the last 500 years. Ore is the source of all magic, and legend tells that there was no ore on old Earth's surface, and what little could be found was taken from a ring of rocks floating in space. But that didn't last long, however, and when the ore was gone, civilization on Earth quickly collapsed into savagery. The human technists are mentioned every now and then. Old stories tell that when ore was first used to power magic, that the technists of old Earth had rejected it, instead using it as fuel for their machines. This angered the first wizards so much at this perceived perversion of ore that the technists were banished to space and every machine on Earth was destroyed. Technos research shows ore as a form of solidified energy, making it the perfect fuel for mechanical and psionic manipulations. The Mantis, one of the Technos races, believes that ore's complex internal structure reveals it to be an organic byproduct, but will not say which process or creature. While they will periodically be mentioned, the hunters are never physically shown, so they obviously aren't playable. The Observer also mentions that human life first appeared on planet Zara nearly 3,000 years ago, with the humans arriving in crude spaceships drained of ore fragments after they took what ore they could find and abandoned the Earth. With the flights taking decades, they don't talk about what happened to the people that were left on the Earth. After the Technos invaded, the war raged for decades in a brutal deadlock. Eventually a truce was called that would keep the nations in an uneasy peace for centuries. The only common law between the two was that no child of both nations should ever be born. This law was nearly broken 20 years ago, however, when Katrina and Andrus, a rogue Quicksilver and Dark Angel, fled to the Deadlands together. However, they were eventually captured before they could bear a child. The war ravaged the planet with great cracks spreading across the land. None explore them for the fear of the piranha devils lurking in the depths. Most of the arcane nations believe them to be created by Technos energy wells. The Technos don't care, and the Magus lizards simply bow their heads in sadness and say nothing about it. So, as you may have gotten from that bit of a lore explanation, either I'm a misunderstanding it a bit, or there's definitely a few holes in the lore and story that could do with some fleshing out. For example, the Observer says that the war's been going on for 500 years, as then also says that it had been going on for decades and that a truce had been made until 20 years ago, or when the rogue Quicksilver and Dark Angel fled to the Deadlands together, but they were caught before they could have a child, which would have been a spark for another war, but in that case, why are we fighting in-game? It doesn't really explain these things, it's just kinda, yeah, here's some lore, just go with it, pretty much. The strategy mode starts very simple to ease you into the game and the mechanics of it. The first stage, Create a Lake, is very simple, it's just wipe out the other team completely and you win. Stage 2, Mount Atlas, introduces Ore, a valuable resource for both sides that allows the warriors to use their individual character abilities, but I'll come back to those later when I go through each of the individual characters. Stage 3, the Great Desert, introduces bases. From here on out, you have to destroy the enemy base and wipe out all of their warriors to win. While your base stands, you can use your accrued ore to buy new units. Each team has a unit that starts at 70, and they go up in increments of 10 to a maximum of 130. A lot of the strategy mode stages have some form of restriction or limitation as to why a certain type of warrior might not be available for that one. and they're usually weighted a little bit towards one side at the start. For example, Stage 4, the Deadlands, starts with only 3 Arcane Warriors and their base, versus 5 or 6 Technos ones who also have a base, but the Technos side only has Wasps, their weakest unit. Or Stage 7, the Breeders, where the Arcane side doesn't have a base and has to rely on the Piranha Devil's spawning abilities to overwhelm the Technos side, who while they start with less warriors, do have access to a base. This all culminates on Stage 12, one final battle in the holy arcane city of Kenai, where you start with everyone and a mountain of ore to work with. But who are the warriors of each race? What do they do? Where do they make their home? And most importantly, how do they fight? Up first, let's take a look at the Technos invaders. Wasps are the weakest of the Technos units. Armed with their blasters, they can rapid-fire low-damaging shots with their A, release a freeze blast from their wings which will freeze the enemy solid at very close range with their B, and if they're close to a frozen enemy they can drain their health with their C. They're also the only character in the game who hovers instead of jumping or taking flight. Wasps are fast, but very frail, which makes them easy prey for warriors like the Piranha Devil and the Dark Angel, but their ability to get some stinging hits in and then quickly move to safety gives them a better matchup against the Bronto than you might expect at first glance. They're definitely more of a kind of death by thousand cuts type of fighter. They make their home in the Hive, cost 70 ore to summon from the base, can hover over 3 tiles per turn, and their map ability is to heal an allied warrior for 25 HP at the cost of 20 ore. Up next are the Kill Cycles, the most independent of the Technos nations. Violent cyborgs who are basically humans permanently mounted to their, well, kill cycles, with each one ruling over its own feudal domain, even though they're often just a tiny parcel of wasteland that's pretty much only inhabited by some migrating Bronto hordes, and maybe some primitive arcane tribes. They can shoot a blast of plasma with their A, start dropping bombs with their B, and if things are looking bad they can charge up their C and go for a kamikaze attack, where their death is certain, but it does a ton of damage to the other warrior if it makes contact. Kill cycles are pretty maneuverable on the ground, but can also fly up quite high for either their bombing run, or to just get away from a bad situation for a moment to breathe. Although their mobility in the air is significantly slower, and they do need to land in order to regain their energy. Their flight and mobility gives them a good matchup against the Bronto, but makes them weaker against enemies that have tracking moves or flight of their own. They make their home in the Toxic Dump, cost 80 ore to summon from the base, can fly over 3 tiles per turn, and their map ability is to self-destruct, doing 25 damage to everything within 6 tiles of its location. Up next are the Tesla Lords, humanoid creatures who live in their own blissful agony in communion with what they call the Prime Coruscant. They absorb energy in its wildest form, often in the form of pure electricity. They're strong at range but have no real offense up close. Their A shoots a lightning bolt from their staff that can bounce off walls and other terrain. Their B is a teleport that can quickly get them out of trouble and across the stage, and their C puts down a generator that will periodically shoot out a tracking bolt at the opponent. The Tesla Lords are kind of middling in the speed department. They're frail but also have the longest energy bar in the game for their attacks. This makes them pretty good against enemies of equal speed because they can get some hits in and then teleport away when they get close. This also makes them pretty good against Bronto, but equally if they get hit by a charge they can just get comboed to death by it. Like many fighting game players, they make their home in the lab. They cost 90 ore to summon from the base, but can only walk 1 tile per turn, which leaves them to rely on their map ability for their mobility, as their ability is to teleport across the map, with the ore cost increasing with the distance that they intend to travel. This also makes them expert infiltrators in the strategy mode, because you kinda just save up your ore, teleport them towards the enemy base as close as you can, then walk in, beat the one thing, and then take the base. The Razor Fiends are stated by the Observer to be born of pain and fear, a murderous, psychotic brain implanted into a metal sheath, always seeking upgrades, more blades. Razor Fiends can shoot a blade straight forward with their A, They can spin their entire body around while swinging their blades with their B, and place down a blade wall, a stage hazard that they can walk through just fine, but the opponent will take damage on contact with, as their C. Razorfane is a good, balanced character with a decent bit of just about everything. Their ability to rapid fire a few blades paired with their hazard and physical abilities gives them a good matchup for Piranha Devils and the Ectons, but characters who can make their way to them quickly and rush them down, like the Bronto, or characters who can keep away from them like the Fire Witch, make for a bit more of a challenging opponent. The Razorfanes make their home in the Steel Hallway. They cost 100 auto summon from the base and can walk 2 tiles per turn. Their map ability allows them to summon up a blade wall that prevents everyone that isn't them from walking over that target tile for 2 turns, at the cost of 15 ore. And just a little side note, ever since I was a kid, they were always my favourite Technos unit. I've also always just liked the way they say ow when they get hit, and also their death sound is super cool. Quicksilvers are probably the most human of the Technos races, shapeshifters who can switch between a human form and the form that we see in-game. However, they are stated to need to switch into this human form for at least 10 minutes per day. The softness and desires of their flesh has led a majority of the race to hate this perceived imperfection, though. Despite this, a small group within the nation advocates for and accepts their dual nature. In-game, Quicksilvers are, well, they're quick, being one of, if not the fastest base runners in the game. This speed allows them to get in close and shift their arms into blades for a strike with their 1, they can shoot orbs as a ranged option with their 2, and they can put up a barrier that reflects projectiles with their 3. Quicksilver's speed gives them good matchups with the slower arcane races who may need time to set up, like the Ecton, but also gives her less ideal matchups against those who can match her speed, such as the Moglin Riders or a charging Bronto. Quicksilvers make their home in the Juicer, a stage where you're basically just running on ice. They cost 110 ore to summon from the base and can run 3 tiles per turn. Their map ability, Madness, makes an enemy warrior wander randomly for the next 3 turns at the cost of 50 ore. The Mantis is stated to be the most mysterious race encountered by the human Technists when they travel to the galactic core after they were exiled from the Earth. Described as an insidious evil from the galactic core whose treachery has doomed 100 worlds, they haven't explained exactly what the Hunters are, or why the Hunters have pursued the Mantises for over 1,000 years. Between this and what the Mantises seem to know and want to keep secret about ore, leads me to personally believe that they might produce ore, and they don't want to release that information at the risk of their entire race then just becoming enslaved or imprisoned to be used as an ore farm. The Mantis is one of the slower Technos warriors, but makes up for it with increased reach with its extending mandible for its A. It can shoot out a tracking bloodbot that will return after dealing damage and heal the Mantis with its B, and it can drop a small gravity well that will pull the enemy towards it with its C. The extended reach paired with the area control and sustain makes Mantises an ideal matchup into Ectons and the Piranha Devils, but their lack of maneuverability makes them weak against the Bronto and the Dark Angels. Mantises make their home in the Proving Ground and can be summoned from the base for the cost of 120 ore. They can walk 2 tiles per turn and their map ability is Overload, which increases an ally's maximum HP and energy for 3 turns. But at the end of that 3rd turn, that ally dies. This effect can be used for 40 ore. The Overload ability is another reason why I personally believe that Mantises may produce ore. The final Technos unit is the Jäger, German for Hunter. The Observer says that they were found by early Technos explorers, deactivated and encased in the solid rock of a dead moon. Revived and reprogrammed, the Jaegers now patrol the Deadlands on the borders of the Technos nations, hunting down all organic life. Despite their normal hostility towards organic life, the Jaegers tell of a boy who repairs them so well that they can function far beyond their normal full capacity, and are protective of him, to the point where they won't tell the other Technos nations his name or his whereabouts. Jaeger is the slowest of the Technos units, but makes up for it by having the most health. They can punch in a semicircle around them with their A, shoot a rapid-fire laser at close range with their B, and fire long-range missiles with their C. Their strong presence at close range paired with their long-range tracking missiles gives the Jaeger a good matchup into the Fire Witches and the Prana Devils, but their size and lack of mobility makes them have a tough time with the Brontu and makes them more susceptible to the Ekton's traps. Jaegers make their home in the factory and can be summoned from the base for the cost of 130 ore, making them the most expensive unit on the Techno side. They can walk 2 tiles per turn, and their map ability is Nuke, which for the cost of 40 ore will blast a target tile for 15 damage within a range of 5. They also have a special ability that will allow them to harvest more ore than their fellow Technos warriors if left on an ore tile. Now that we've covered all the Technos warriors, let's move on to the Arcane side. Prana Devils spawn in the deepest of caverns and only leave for food. The Magus Lizards claim that they'd been sealed in an underground tomb and were accidentally released, nearly overrunning the entire world until they found the magic to stop them. The other Arcane nations don't know why the Piranhas fight alongside them, or honestly if they even think at all, but their ferocity and sheer numbers, paired with their ability to reproduce asexually, allows them to form a deadly swarm. The Piranhas A rapid fires toxic blobs. They do a little bit of damage and have a short reach. Their C lays an egg which after a few seconds will hatch into a small piranha that will run around the map and will do damage on contact. But their main move is their B, where they leap and bite onto the enemy. This brings up a meter that you have to mash to either get out of or to keep the attack going, as it gradually does tick damage. The Piranha's speed and good damage up close gives a good matchup into Wasps and Tesla Lords, but makes opponents who are strong up close, such as the Mantis or the Razorfane, quite difficult for them. Piranhas make their home in the depths and can be summoned from the base for the cost of 70 ore. They can walk 3 tiles per turn, and their map ability has some risk reward to it. It only costs 10 ore, and a Piranha can attempt to spawn. This will either do nothing, or create another Prana Devil on the board. Also, credit where it's due, their blood-curling screech after they win a match is honestly kind of just one of the most memorable sounds on the PS1 for me. The Ekton Ghostmasters live in the most remote regions of the planet, where they practice their horrific rituals, consuming the ectoplasm of dying creatures to extend their own lives. The Observer notes that the Arcane nations must have been desperate if they sought the aid of the Ektons. Ekton's A is an attack with its whip, shooting a projectile that slows on hit, and this can be debilitating, allowing for multiple hits in quick succession. Ekton's C lays a trap. If the enemy walks over it, they'll be trapped in a net until they can mash out of it, which leaves them as easy prey for Ekton's B, which drains their health and heals him. The slow from the whip, paired with the traps, make Ekton a great matchup into Jaegers. They also do pretty well against kill cycles, slowing them down on the ground when they land to regenerate their energy. However, they struggle with fast opponents like Quicksilvers and especially Wasps, who are fast enough to dodge his whip and get in a lot of shots, while not really needing to worry about the net because they're hovering above the ground. Ektons make their home in the Cenotaph and can be summoned from the base for the cost of 80 ore. They can walk 2 tiles per turn, and their map ability allows them to use 25 ore to consume 25 health from a nearby enemy to heal itself. Ekton's strategy revolves a lot around healing, partially because it makes sense for the character, and also because they have the tied lowest health for any of the Arcane units. The Fire Witches live in volcanic calderas and rarely venture out to colder areas. Many years ago, a Fire Witch appeared at a conclave of Arcane nations with a warning to never let a Prana Devil reach adulthood. Fire Witch's A shoots a simple fireball that can be used on the ground or in the air. Their B can only be used in the air and is a dive bomb attack, which does decent damage but leaves the Fire Witch vulnerable. Seriously, it has a ton of recovery frames. And their C drops a fiery inferno on the ground that damages any enemy who would stand on it. Their flight, paired with the fact that unlike others they regen energy while flying, gives the Fire Witch a pretty good matchup into kill cycles, and their ability to dive bomb and trade a bit of damage gives them a solid matchup into Razor Fane and Wasps. Jaeger's tracking missiles make the matchup a bit difficult, and the Tesla Lords can just teleport away from the dive bomb and get a free hit for an absolutely miserable matchup. Genuinely, I think this is probably about as close as you're gonna see in this game to an unwinnable matchup towards one side. Fire Witches make their home in the volcano and can be summoned from the base for the cost of 90 ore. They can fly 2 tiles per turn, and their map power is to create a Fire Shroud for 15 ore, which blocks all units that aren't the Fire Witch from entering it. It's basically the same as Razor Fane's ability, just for the arcane side. The Mogollon Riders are probably the characters in the game that we know the least about. They don't get mentioned in any of the Observer's notes between missions or anything, so all that we really know about them is that they bond at birth with their Mogollon mounts. Mogollon's A shoots a bolt of magic, their B uses their mount's tongue to attack, but can also be used on power-ups to pick them up, and that can then be used again to fire a much more damaging projectile. Their C just flips places between her and her opponent, the in-game description for it even just calling it the old switcheroo. They're pretty fast, and their ability to attack from range and flip places with their opponent gives them good matchups into Quicksilvers, kill cycles, and Jaegers. However, this does make them vulnerable to Wasp's ability to just get in and fly around them with their stinging shots. Mogollons make their home in the Mystic Glen and can be summoned from the base for the cost of 100 ore. They can walk 3 tiles per turn, and their map power is to heal 25 points of HP. The cost of this ability starts at 15, but goes up by 5 per tile she is away. This ability will also heal Quicksilver's Madness if the warrior had been inflicted with it. The Brontu, in terms of practicality, are rhinos that have 6 legs. They're the heavies of the Arcane Nations, and are noted to have accumulated ore that empowers them with speed, strength, and natural weaponry. As a result of this, they're often captured and used in ceremonial battle. Brontu's A is a Thunder Roar, basically a short-range projectile that slightly pushes the opponent back. Their B is a Charge, basically they run fast and they hit things, knocking them into the air, and their C is a Gas Cloud that does damage over time if you stay in it. The Brontu's quick speed when charging, paired with its durability, allows it to run down slow enemies and ones that would rather fight it at close range, so warriors like the Quicksilver, Jaeger, and the Mantises struggle with the Brontu, but at the same time, they struggle with Wasps and kill cycles and basically anything that can just maneuver around them, especially if it's from the air. Brontu makes its home in the Watering Hole, and costs 110 ore to summon from the base. They can walk 2 tiles per turn, and its map ability costs 10 ore to use, and it will shove adjacent enemies just 1 tile away. Honestly, I think this may be the least useful of all of the warrior's abilities. The Magus Lizards are a race of ancient natives to planet Zara, who command primeval magic and held dominion over the entire world before the humans arrived. In the end, their pursuit and curiosity for knowledge led to their doom, as they unwittingly released the Prana Devils unto the world. Their A is a simple sword swing, their B summons a homing spirit to attack, and their C calls down a rain of meteors from the sky, but this takes a very long time to channel. Magus Lizards have good matchups against Tesla Lords and kill cycles due to their solid mix of ranged and close-up options, but they struggle with Quicksilvers due to their speed and ability to reflect projectiles. The Magus Lizards make their home in the Desert Ruins and cost 120 ore to summon from the base. They can walk 2 tiles per turn, and their map ability is Starfall. Costing 40 ore, they can attack an enemy up to 5 tiles away for 15 damage. Basically, it's exactly the same as Jaeger's nuke. The Stygian Dark Angels are a result of well-intentioned magic gone horribly wrong. Created by ancient wizards trying to make a perfect creature by twisting human life patterns, they ended up creating a flawed and angry species, whose weak eyes can't bear the sunlight that their souls crave. Their A shoots lasers from their eyes and can just melt through most enemies. Their B fires a shockwave from their staff in a circle around them, and their C summons an obelisk that heals them for a small amount. Their high damage, range of options, and flight gives the Dark Angels good matchups against most of the roster, and while the game does list Quicksilver as a counter, assumably for their speed and reflective abilities, it's honestly less of a bad matchup and more of just a closer one. The Dark Angels make their home in the High Temple, appearing only when necessary, then vanishing back to their abodes. They can be summoned from the base for 130 ore, making them the most expensive arcane unit, and they can fly up to 2 tiles per turn. Their map ability is a teleport, that for the cost of 10 ore plus 5 per tile, they can move themselves or an adjacent ally up to 3 tiles away. While I think the game is generally pretty well balanced, I feel like the Dark Angels are probably the best base character in the game though. They do a ton of damage, they can fly, they can do basically anything. When you complete the strategy mode, each difficulty is shown almost like the scale of the victory for the side that you're playing on. Easy mode is a good win that pushes the enemy back quite a bit. Normal mode is a much more decisive victory, where their survivors are pushed to the deadlands, and hard mode is basically just you wiped them all out. They're done. They aren't coming back. Completing the strategy mode also provides some benefits. Beating the strategy mode on the Technos side on hard mode will unlock their secret fighter, the Beta Razor. Beta Razor is an upgraded Razor Fane with more health. It's faster, stronger, and deadlier. It can also now fly. Stated as the first of the Technos races to receive their upgrades, I can only assume that the Razor Fanes must have been the primary infantry force for the Technos armies. The Beta Razor still shoots blades with its A, although these travel further than the normal Razor Fanes. Its B is still a body spin, but it does more damage, and their C is a slam from the air like that of the Fire Witch, only this one has no recovery whatsoever. You just slam down and pop instantly back up. The Beta Razor can't be used in strategy mode, so it's limited to the Mayhem mode, but it makes its home in the Dark Maze, which itself is unlocked for beating the Technos side of the strategy mode on normal difficulty. Completing the strategy mode for the Arcane side on hard mode will also unlock their secret fighter, the Mega Piranha. Their unlock is phrased as while most of the other Arcane races are celebrating their victory, the first Mega Piranha is hatching from its dark chrysalis. When I talked about the Fire Witches, I mentioned about how one once appeared before a conclave of arcane nations to warn them to never let a Piranha Devil reach maturity. This is what happens when a Piranha Devil reaches maturity. The Mega Piranha is now more green than blue, with bigger claws, bigger teeth, glowing red eyes, and a significant health increase. We don't know if this was a planned thing and the piranhas are secretly smarter than they ever let on, or if it was just a coincidence. Either way, a new threat has now emerged. Their moveset is the same as the regular Piranha Devil, but their A has increased range, their B now travels further and does more damage per tick, and once the eggs hatch from their C, they move faster and deal more damage. The Mega Piranha can also jump ridiculously high and grab onto flying enemies during their ascent. The Mega Piranhas make their home in the Mania Circle, which is unlocked by completing the Arcane side of the strategy mode on normal difficulty. I mentioned earlier that I thought that most of the roster was pretty balanced, with the Dark Angel probably being the best. This does not apply to the unlockable fighters. Beta Razor and the Mega Piranha are disgustingly broken, and honestly, they can take out pretty much the rest of the roster just by themselves. Realistically, their only two challenging matchups are against each other and in the mirror match. And that's the Unholy War. Is it a game that I'd say is worth remembering? Honestly, I'm kind of conflicted on that. My nostalgia from it being a game that I played a lot when I was a kid says yes, but after replaying it, the game itself isn't amazing. It's not awful, it looks okay, it plays okay, the music is fine, but it's just missing some things to just push it into being really good. In that regard, I'd kind of compare it to the original Power Stone, which came out a few months after it. A kind of okay game that got a sequel and switched things up in such a way that it retained the same characters and added a few new ones, but it went from being a 1v1 3D arena fighter to a 4-player arena fighter, which really ramped up its hectic nature. I think the world and the various races within it had a fair bit of potential to expand upon, and could have become really interesting. Maybe they could have had a sequel where the hunters find the Technos and land on planet Zara. This way they could turn it into either a three-way war, or make the Technos and the Arcane forces now unite against a new threat. But with no sequel, no comic or book or anything, it's a world and characters that outside of the little tidbits that we get from the Observer is more than likely never going to find its way to getting expanded upon, and will probably just continue to fade away into the mists of history. So with all that said, does anyone remember the Unholy War? Not really, no, and I don't foresee that changing in the future, especially with Toys for Bob moving on to greater things, with Crash, Spyro, and a project for Xbox that hasn't been fully revealed as of the time of me recording this, but might be by the time this video comes out. That should just about do it for this episode. I'll have both sides of the strategy mode linked in the end card if you want to see those. As always, feel free to click any of the buttons down below if you feel so inclined, tell me what you think of the game if you've played it, and I'll hopefully see you all again for whatever it is I'm doing next. Okay, thanks for watching, later!